Here is something that should be impossible. Two people, same city, same age, 47 years old, same calendar hanging on the wall, same number of birthdays behind them. But if you pull their blood and look at their cells, one of them is biologically a decade older than the other. Not metaphorically, not in terms of how they feel when they wake up in the morning. At the level of their chromosomes, at the level of their DNA. One of them has the cells of a 57-year-old. The other does not, and I'm not going to tell you why yet, because the reason was hiding inside a Nobel Prize discovery. And the discovery itself was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part was what it revealed about who gets to age slowly and who does not. That is what we are going to get into. But first, you need to understand a tiny structure that is running a countdown clock inside every cell in your body right now. And you have never once thought about it. They are called telomeres, and here is the simplest way to think about them. You know those little plastic caps on the ends of your shoelaces? The ones that keep the lace from fraying apart? Those are called aglets, by the way, which is a word that exists purely so it can show up in trivia games. Telomeres do the same thing for your chromosomes. Your chromosomes are long strands of DNA, and at the very tips, there are these repeating sequences of genetic code that do not actually code for anything. They are just buffer material, protective caps. And every time a cell divides, which is how your body repairs itself, replaces old tissue, heals wounds, keeps you alive, a little bit of that protective cap gets worn away, gets shorter, snipped off by the mechanics of DNA replication, and when the telomere gets short enough, the cell stops dividing. It enters a state called senescence, which basically means the cell is still alive, but it has retired. It is done. It sits there, takes up space, and sometimes actively causes problems. Senescent cells release inflammatory signals that damage the cells around them. They are like that coworker who has quit but has not left the building and is now just complaining in the break room and making everyone else's job harder. Elizabeth Blackburn figured out the enzyme that maintains these caps. It is called telomerase. She shared the Nobel Prize for this in 2009, along with Carol Greider and Jack Szostak. And the basic framework she established is remarkably clean. Telomeres shorten with each cell division. Telomerase can rebuild them, but usually not fast enough to keep up. Over time, your telomeres get shorter. Your cells lose their ability to regenerate. You age. That is the molecular clock. That is the countdown. And if this were the whole story, it would be a beautiful piece of biology and nothing more. But here is where it gets interesting. If telomeres shortened at the same rate for everyone, this would just be a clean, elegant story about the mechanics of getting old. Fascinating, sure, but not unsettling. The thing is, they do not shorten at the same rate for everyone, not even close. And the variable that predicts how fast your telomeres are eroding is not what most people guess. It is not genetics. Genetics play a role, sure. Maybe 15 to 20% of the variation in telomere length is heritable, but they are not the dominant factor here. It is not whether you run marathons. It is not whether you eat vegetables. So the question becomes, what is it? What is the thing that determines whether your cellular countdown clock ticks slowly or races ahead? Blackburn and her colleague Elissa Epel started pulling on this thread in a series of studies in the early 2000s, and what they found and what dozens of studies across multiple countries after them confirmed was a pattern so consistent it almost looks like a law of biology. Your socioeconomic status predicts your telomere length. Income, education level, position in the social hierarchy. The lower you are, the shorter your telomeres. The higher you are, the longer they stay. And this is not a subtle statistical wobble you need a magnifying glass to see. In some of the strongest studies, the telomere length difference between the poorest and wealthiest quartiles of the population corresponded to roughly 8 to 10 years of additional biological aging. 8 to 10 years. Think about what that actually means for a human being. Take two people, both 47, same number of trips around the sun. But the one living in poverty has cells that look like they belong to someone approaching 60. The one with resources, with stability, with a financial buffer between themselves and the next crisis, their cells look their age, maybe younger. Same birthday, different chromosomes, different cells, different body. Now, okay, I can hear the objection forming, and it is a reasonable one. I would have this objection, because the obvious pushback is this. Of course, poorer people have worse health outcomes. They eat worse food. They smoke more. They exercise less. They have less access to health care. This is a lifestyle story, not a biology story. Correlation, not causation. Personal choices, not structural forces. Fix the choices, fix the outcome. And here is the thing. That objection is not stupid. It is actually the default model in most people's heads, the personal responsibility model. You are unhealthy because of what you do. Change what you do. Change your outcome. It is intuitive. It feels right. It is also the foundation of most health policy in the Western world, and there is a series of studies that absolutely demolishes it. They are called the Whitehall Studies. And they are, I think, in some of the most important and most underappreciated research on human health ever conducted. Starting in 1967, an epidemiologist named Michael Marmot began tracking British civil servants. Not a handful, thousands of them. Over 17,000 in the first study alone. All working for the same government, all in the same country, which matters enormously because Britain has the National Health Service, meaning everyone in the study had access to the same healthcare system, same employer, same access to doctors, same hospitals, same prescriptions, and civil servants have remarkably well-documented job grades. You know exactly where everyone sits in the hierarchy. From the senior administrators at the top to the clerical staff and messengers at the bottom. It is a hierarchy with clear, measurable rungs. Marmot tracked their health outcomes over decades, and what he found was this. For every step down the hierarchy, health got worse. Not just at the bottom compared to the top, at every single rung. The people one step below the top were less healthy than the people at the top. The people 2 steps down were less healthy than the people 1 step down. A perfect gradient. A staircase of declining health that mapped exactly onto position in the hierarchy. Not a cliff between rich and poor. A staircase. Every step down, worse outcomes. Heart disease, cancer, gastrointestinal disease. All of it. And here is the part that breaks the personal responsibility model into pieces. Marmot controlled for everything: smoking, diet, exercise, obesity, alcohol consumption, cholesterol levels, blood pressure, access to health care, which again was identical for everyone in the study. He controlled for all of it, stripped away every behavioral explanation, and the gradient was still there. Position in the hierarchy predicted mortality independently of every lifestyle factor they could measure. Let me say that again, because it matters. After you remove every behavioral variable that anyone has ever blamed for poor health outcomes, the hierarchy gradient persists. The guys in the lowest employment grades had 3 times the mortality rate of the guys in the highest grades. 3 times, and you could not explain it away with cigarettes or cheeseburgers or a lack of gym memberships. That is not a lifestyle finding. That is a biological finding. Something about where you sit in a social structure is getting under your skin, literally, into your cells, into your chromosomes, and it is doing damage that cannot be explained by what you eat or whether you go for a jog. Sit with that for a second, because everything that comes next depends on you actually absorbing what Whitehall proved. So if it is not choices, if it is not access to health care, if it is not diet or exercise or smoking, then what is the body actually responding to? What is the precise mechanism that takes your zip code, your bank balance, your position on an organizational chart, and converts it into shorter telomeres, sicker cells, and an earlier death? And this is the part I cannot stop thinking about. Because the mechanism is not mysterious. It is not some unknown force lurking in the shadows waiting for a breakthrough. Scientists have mapped it in extraordinary detail. And it has a name: allostatic load, which is a technical term coined by Bruce McEwen and Elliot Steller in 1993, and it means something very specific and very human. It means the cumulative biological cost of constantly adapting to threat. Here is how it works. When you encounter a stressor, your body activates what you already know as the fight or flight response. Your hypothalamus, a small region at the base of your brain, signals your adrenal glands. Cortisol floods your system. Heart rate goes up. Blood sugar rises, your immune system shifts into high alert, inflammatory markers spike, blood gets shunted toward your muscles and away from your digestive system. This is a beautiful system, elegant. It evolved to save your life. A lion shows up on the savannah, cortisol gets you running, you survive. The lion leaves, cortisol drops back to baseline. Your body recovers, you go about your day. System works perfectly. But here is the problem, and this is where I need you to pay attention. That system was designed for acute threats, short bursts. Lion shows up, lion leaves. The stressor has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The system was not designed for what poverty actually is, which is a chronic, low-grade, never-ending threat that does not leave. You cannot outrun it. You cannot fight it. It is there when you wake up. It is there when you try to sleep. Will I make rent this month? Can I afford this prescription? What happens if the car breaks down? What happens if I lose this shift? What if my kid gets sick and I cannot afford to take time off work? And the body does not distinguish between a lion and a landlord. Cortisol is cortisol. The molecular structure is identical whether the threat is a predator or a past due notice, and when the threat never resolves, cortisol never drops back to baseline. It just runs, continuously, for months, for years, for decades. And cortisol running continuously is not a feature of the stress response. It is a catastrophe. Let me walk you through exactly what happens, because the specifics matter here. Chronically elevated cortisol suppresses telomerase, the very enzyme that rebuilds your telomeric caps. So your cells are dividing, your telomeres are shortening with every division, and the one repair mechanism that is supposed to keep up is being actively shut down by the stress hormone that will not go away. Your cellular countdown clock is not just ticking, it is accelerating, and the brakes have been cut. But wait, because cortisol is not working alone. It never does. Chronic cortisol elevation triggers a cascade of secondary damage. Inflammatory markers, things like interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, stay permanently elevated. And chronic low-level inflammation is nothing like acute inflammation, which is your body healing a wound, doing its job. Chronic inflammation is your immune system turning on your own tissues. Your blood vessels get damaged. Atherosclerotic plaques build up. Your organs sustain constant low-grade assault. Your brain, particularly the hippocampus, which is critical for memory and learning, actually shrinks under sustained inflammatory exposure. Sapolsky himself, Robert Sapolsky at Stanford, spent decades documenting how chronic cortisol exposure literally kills neurons in the hippocampus. The stress hormone that is supposed to save your life is dissolving part of your brain. Oxidative stress increases alongside all of this. These are reactive oxygen species, basically toxic byproducts of a metabolism running in permanent overdrive. They damage DNA directly. They damage the telomeres directly, accelerating the shortening beyond what normal cell division would cause. And the body's antioxidant defenses, the systems that would normally clean up this molecular debris, get overwhelmed. They cannot keep pace. The damage outstrips the repair. And then there is sleep. Oh, sleep. Because cortisol disrupts sleep architecture in a way that is almost sadistically precise. Not just the amount of sleep, the structure of it. The deep, slow-wave sleep, stages 3 and 4, that is essential for cellular repair, for memory consolidation, for immune function, for clearing metabolic waste from the brain, gets truncated. You get less of it. And the sleep you do get is shallower, more fragmented, less restorative. People under chronic financial stress show measurably different sleep architecture on polysomnography, even when they spend the same number of hours in bed. The quantity looks similar, the quality is destroyed, and the cruelest part is that poor sleep further elevates cortisol the next day, which further disrupts sleep the next night, which further elevates cortisol. It is a feedback loop. A biological trap with no exit door. So you have cortisol suppressing telomerase. You have inflammatory markers destroying tissue. You have oxidative stress shredding DNA. You have sleep disruption preventing the repair that would normally happen overnight. And all of these pathways feed into each other, amplify each other, compound over time. That is allostatic load. Not a single stressor, not a single pathway, a system of interlocking biological damage that accumulates silently, invisibly, inside the body of every person living under conditions of chronic, uncontrollable threat. And here is the thing that makes this different from almost any other health story. The body is not malfunctioning. The body is not wrong. That is the part that haunts me. If you are living in a situation where resources are genuinely scarce, where the next crisis is always one paycheck or one medical bill away, where you have minimal control over the fundamental conditions of your own existence, the stress response is not an overreaction. It is an accurate assessment of the environment. The biology is reading the situation correctly. The environment is the problem. The body is responding to conditions it cannot fix, and it is wearing itself out in the process. The machinery is working exactly as evolution designed it. The problem is that the threat never ends, and the machinery was never built for that. Now. You might be thinking, okay, this is terrible, but can you reverse it? If someone escapes poverty, if their income goes up, if the chronic stressor finally resolves, do the telomeres recover? Does the allostatic load drop? Can the clock slow back down? And the answer is, partly. Some of it can reverse, and that matters. Cortisol levels can normalize when the stressor is removed. Inflammatory markers can drop. And sleep architecture can improve. Telomerase activity can increase. Blackburn and Eppel actually showed that targeted interventions, things like structured stress reduction programs, meditation, consistent exercise, and critically social support, can measurably increase telomerase activity. Dean Ornish published a small but striking study in 2008 showing that comprehensive lifestyle changes increased telomerase activity by about 29% over 3 months. So there is plasticity in the system. There is real hope in the biology, but, and this is a devastating but, some of the damage compounds in ways that do not reverse. Telomeres that have shortened past a critical threshold do not fully recover even when the stress resolves. Cells that have entered senescence do not re-enter the cell cycle. They are done. Neurons in the hippocampus that died under years of cortisol exposure do not regenerate, or at best regenerate only partially. Organs that have sustained decades of inflammatory damage carry scars. The longer the exposure, the more permanent the imprint. Allostatic load is not like a battery you can simply recharge. It is more like structural damage to a building's foundation. You can reinforce what remains, you can prevent further collapse, but you cannot get back what is already crumbled. And then there is the finding that takes this from an individual health story to something that operates on an entirely different scale. And I want to be careful here because this research is still emerging, still being debated, still being replicated across populations, but the direction the data is pointing is hard to look at directly. There is evidence that shortened telomeres may not stay in one generation. Epigenetic changes associated with chronic stress, changes in how genes are expressed, changes in telomere maintenance can be transmitted to offspring. The work is coming from multiple labs now. Sonia Entringer at the University of California published research showing that maternal prenatal stress exposure was associated with shorter telomere length in newborns. Babies who have not yet lived a single day outside the womb, already showing the cellular signature of their mother's stress environment, meaning the biological cost of poverty may echo forward in time. A mother's allostatic load, her cortisol environment, her inflammatory state during pregnancy may influence the telomere length her child is born with. The countdown clock may already be set to a faster speed before that child draws its first breath. Think about what that actually means. It means the damage is not just happening to the person living through it. It may be writing itself into the next generation. Before that child makes a single choice, before that child eats a single meal, or takes a single step, or has a single thought about personal responsibility. The conditions of the parent's life may have already biased the biological clock toward faster aging. This is not about willpower anymore. This is not about making better decisions. This is a mechanism, a physical, molecular, measurable mechanism by which structural inequality inscribes itself into human biology and transmits that inscription across generations. Poverty is not just a condition people endure. It is a biological force, operating below the level of consciousness, below the level of choice, at the level of chromosomes and enzymes and gene expression, and that transforms the question entirely. This is not a story about two people with different habits. This is a story about what chronic deprivation does to the machinery of life itself. So let me take you back to where we started. Two people, same city, same age, 47 years old, one with the cells of a 57-year-old, one with cells that match her age. And now you understand what separates them. It is not their genes. It is not their willpower. It is not what they had for breakfast or whether they went for a run this morning. It is their address, their income, their position in a hierarchy that they did not build and largely cannot escape. It is years and decades of cortisol with nowhere to go, eroding the protective caps on their chromosomes while they slept, while they worked, while they worried about things that wealthier people never have to think about even once. You are not looking at two people who age differently. You are looking at what a society does to a body when it decides that body is worth less. And the mechanism is not hidden. It is not waiting to be discovered. It is cortisol. It is inflammation. It is oxidative stress. It is shattered sleep. It is allostatic load compounding silently across years and sometimes across generations, all of it mapped, measured, published, replicated. We know exactly how this works. We have known for years. So the question I want to leave you with is not a scientific one. The science is settled on this. The question is what it means to live in a society that has this information, that has had it for decades, and the biological clock keeps ticking anyway. What does it mean when the damage is this well documented and this well understood, and nothing fundamental changes? Tell me in the comments what you think, because I genuinely do not know the answer to that one, and I am not sure anyone does.